Hi everyone, and welcome to our first video about news writing. In these videos we will be exploring how to write a good news story, and in doing so we will also begin to develop our skills of newsletter and press release writing. Why? Well, a newsletter, the clue is in the name, contains news stories among other things. And a press release is essentially a ready-made news story that you send to editors and journalists to tell to a wider audience on your behalf. So you could look at news writing as a foundation or building block for newsletter and press release writing. Let's therefore tackle news writing first and build in newsletter and press release writing next week. So, what makes a good news story? Remember news values from our week 2 content? Journalists are more likely to pick up your press release if it speaks to one or more of the news values. Put another way, they are very unlikely to pick it up if it doesn't. Before we even start on the more complex news values, for something to be news, it must be new. This is not necessarily the case for other types of article you might put in a newsletter, which we'll consider next week. Here's a reminder of the key news values and what they mean. In a moment, we're going to do a task that draws on them, so why not pause the video here to make sure you've revised them fully. Based on the news values, note down whether the following topics would make for good news stories. As well as answering simply yes or no, you might in some cases want to answer, well, it depends on X or Y. So, how did you get on? I'll take you through my thinking on the matter. Numbers 3 and 5 are definite no's. They're not new, and there's too much depth involved for news. These two would work better as feature articles. We'll talk more about feature articles next week. All of the others could potentially make for good and interesting news stories, but in all cases it depends. It depends whether the way the story is written speaks to one or more of the news values. That could happen in a number of ways, some of which I'm sure you've considered. To help you evaluate the points you've noted down, I'll take you through some thoughts about number 1, a new business starting up. New businesses start up all the time and usually don't make the news. If, however, the business is big and is going to employ a lot of people, that gives it threshold. If some citizens consider it to be dangerous or problematic in some way, something that could potentially be bad for the environment, for example, that gives it negativity. If the person starting the business up is a celebrity or other well-known person, that gives it elite personalisation. If the new business will provide significant competition for an existing business, perhaps it has even opened up precisely to do so, that gives it narrativization around struggles and potentially good guys and bad guys. There are so many possibilities for news stories, aren't there? The main thing to take away from this task is that the topic in itself will not necessarily make something a good news story. You have to consider what angle to come at it from as well. Your choice of angle can make it speak more to a news value than it would otherwise. Let's do another task, this time focusing on number 6, someone winning an award. Try to come up with 3 angles that you could take on such a story to make it more newsworthy. Pause the video, have a think, and note a few things down. So how did you get on? Here are some good angles to take, though these are not exhaustive, and if you decided on something that I don't mention here, that doesn't necessarily mean it was a bad idea. If the person who won the award had overcome a hurdle, an obstacle, some sort of adversity in order to develop the skill needed to win the award, that would be a great angle to take. An against all odds outcome, if you will. If there is something progressive about the winning of the award, for example, if the person in question in some way develops diversity by, for example, championing the rights and experiences of disabled people, or Black, Asian and minority ethnic people, or LGBTQ people, that would also be a great angle to take. Winning an award can be seen as a very individualistic and competitive thing. So if it's possible to bring some collaboration or giving back to the community because of the award into the story, that would also be a great angle to take. All three of these angles do similar things in terms of news values. They all speak to personalisation by giving us more insight into the winner's experiences or values. They all speak to narrativization by talking about overcoming challenges, fighting for a cause, or creating a happy ending in some way. So now we've got a topic and an angle, let's start thinking about the actual writing of the story. We'll get into the detail of how to do this in the next video, but for now, here are my 3 top tips for news story writing. My overarching rule is, it's all about you, but don't shout about it. The approach to news writing you will likely take in your careers will be from a PR perspective. But if you're in the news genre, you need to keep things pretty neutral. We'll talk more about that overarching point and the balances that you need to draw in one of the other videos. Have a read through the 3 sub-rules. You might well be thinking, but why to these? You mustn't use I, we or you because news stories are always told in the third person. You are not talking directly to your audience. In this way, news stories are like most novels, TV dramas and films. There are experimental ones that address the audience directly, but they're in a minority, or the scenes in films that do that are in a minority. Remember that press releases are built up from a news story structure, and it would make no sense at all for the words I, we and you to be in there if someone else, a journalist, ends up telling your story for you, would it? You mustn't use exaggeration or emotion. News stories are a factual genre, not a persuasive one. News should therefore be reported neutrally. The language you use to report the story should never be emotive. You are presenting your reader with a straightforward state of affairs. This might seem restrictive, but it doesn't need to be. If you are telling a newsworthy story, it should be strong enough without overplaying it. If you're really switched on, you might have realised that this is perhaps a bit more nuanced than I have suggested. Of course, by choosing an angle, you're perhaps going to speak to the emotions or values of your audience in a way to draw them in. And you'd be right. But that must happen only at the level of the angle, not at the level of the language. So why do the rules change for quotes? If you think about it, the reason for including quotes is precisely to get a personal reaction to something. You will get the most interesting quotes from people who really care about the story, whether because of personal involvement, effect on their own life, or a strongly held opinion. All of these things bring with them emotion. In that sense, the neutrality of the reporting style can be balanced out, and you can bring more narrativization to the table with your quotes. Hopefully you've now got a pretty good take on what we're trying to achieve when we write news, and you're ready to get stuck into the detail of the actual writing of a story. We'll explore that in the next video. See you there!